the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
And this has been brought to you by Broad's Beard Care. Go to broadsbeardcare.com, enter promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off of your beard care needs. We also have a signature blend. Check that out. Made specially for us by Kelly Brott. And what can we say? You buy a bottle of that, you're going to support us, and you're going to help him, a local craftsman. So highly recommend that. Once again, go to broadsbeardcare.com. At this time, we are going to be talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Real crazy mystery has been one to talk to us about. And we have our guest, Andy Mercer, with us live from the UK. How are you, sir?
I'm not too bad at all. Yes, I'm over here in the UK. It's just gone midnight, so I'm burning the midnight oil, which is quite normal for me, actually.
Well, when we were booking you, that was the thing, or basically, I'm going to just maybe start calling him our booking agent. Just the way Mark Eddy, just he has all this stuff going on, and just the way things work out. We have all these topics, and it's just fascinating how these things are coming together. And just when we were just talking, then we started emailing back and forth, you and me, and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, midnight's gonna be fine for him." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "All right, that works." I'm like, "Hey, I'm not gonna complain."
It's easy for me. I've been up, to be honest with you, I work afternoons and evenings, so I tend to work late into the night on other projects anyway. I'm a writer as well, and often get more work done at night than you do during the daytime. So I'm always around about 3 a.m. my time. So it's easy for me.
More books. I can't wait.
Yes.
I haven't read this much since I was in high school. I love it. It's great. It really is. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the bookshelf is definitely growing behind us as we do this show.
Excellent.
Yeah, before we let you go too, we're going to make sure you plug that so that way we can get people here way to support you with your books. I was trying to think about how I really wanted to kick this off, but you it's up to you. I mean, if you want to take the lead on this one, I can start. I just kind of go over. I mean, I guess I could do a little bit here, just talking about what this was. This just started off as a regular, just kind of, we're going to go out and we're going to recertify. We're going to up our certification level, and we're going to go mountain climb and hike. Mm-hmm. So these 10 individuals set off to embark on this journey, which, as we go through with it tonight, you're going to realize this goes from just what should be just an innocuous little thing happening. It just almost immediately from the start of the journey, that should have been a red flag that maybe this is not meant to be.
Well, certainly from the beginning, it was what they planned to do. Russia in the 1950s really was not the most exciting of places to be. There was an awful lot to do. So often things like going on a ski hike was quite common. It was something that kept you physically fit, kept you active. Also, you could kind of get away from being under the watchful eye of the Soviet Union for a little while. You could go off into the mountains, off into the woods, and be kind of on your own a little bit. So it wasn't a dramatic thing really initially, because it was just the sort of thing that these kids would do. I mean, they were all experienced hikers, despite only being often in their early 20s. They had all had previous experiences of hiking before, so it was nothing new for them to be doing this. But it wasn't a particularly unpleasant part of the year. It was after Christmas, in January, so the weather was particularly inclement. It was very cold and an awful lot of snow. But then that wasn't concerning them. They mapped out their route, they knew where they were going to go. It was a fairly easy trek in terms of scales, because these kind of treks have different levels of difficulty, and this was kind of moderate difficulty. It wasn't the hardest or the easiest; it was kind of in the middle. So it didn't look like it was going to be a major problem. There was actually originally 11 people supposed to be going on the trek, but on the morning they were supposed to get together, one of them basically didn't make it. They probably overslept or whatever, for whatever reason, didn't make it. So there was only actually 10 of them. So the 10 of them set out, and of course we've got 10 rather long, complicated Russian names to go through to get them. I'll give it a go. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm always tripping over these names, but the main leader of the group was Igor Dyatlov. He was the guy who organised the trek. And of course, it's now called the Dyatlov Pass, and it's named after him, but it didn't have a name the area at the time. But he was the leader of the group. You have Yuri Doroshenko, not too hard to say, Ludmila Dibaneva, Yuri Krinavichenko. It's all their hard work. I'll tell you what we do, guys. The easiest way is to stick with the first names.
That's it.
First names.
We'll make that official that we're doing it first names.
It's easy. I mean, one of the guys who's been interviewed many times over this, who's written a couple of books, Keith McCloskey, even he trips over these names, and he's like one of the real renowned experts on the topic. So it is difficult sometimes. But you have Yuri, who was 21, young guy. Ludmila was one of the two girls in the group. You have Grigori Yuri, who was again a younger guy. Alexander, in mid-20s. Zabina, the other girl. You have Rustin Slobodin, again early 20s. So they're all young guys, and you have Nikolai Therio Borelis. I can't speak, guys. I can't get names right. I'm going to give up. But one of them was actually had surname, which we were discussing earlier. Was basically his father was actually captured and was held on a Soviet prison camps as a political dissident. And basically he met a Russian woman after he came out of the prison and stayed in Russia and obviously had a son who had a French surname. And we had one guy, Semyon, who was a little different. He was 38 years old, obviously quite a bit older than the rest of the group. In fact, it's been suggested he was old enough to be some of them, the group's father. But there are questions about why he was in the group because of that massive age gap, something we can perhaps come to a bit later on. And the 10th member of the group was the one with the easiest name, is Yuri Yudin, who was on the first part of the trek, but actually he had a back problem to begin with, which was made worse by the cold, and eventually he decided to turn back and spent the rest of his life wondering what had happened to his comrades. So you have the 9 of them instead now going off into more of the wilderness of the Ukraine. It was actually Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union, now a separate country, heading further north into the mountains. And again, from their diaries that they kept that were found at the site, everything was going more or less okay. The weather was as expected initially. It started to get worse than expected towards the end of January, but it was all going pretty much to plan until really the last day before the incident itself, whatever it was that happened, because it was noted that they'd already planned their route and they had submitted the route plan to the appropriate authorities, and yet for some reason that last day they didn't camp where they were supposed to camp. Indeed, they weren't supposed to have been on the mountain at all. They were supposed to have been down by the edge of the forest. That was the original intent, and they were going to head further north to a different mountain peak the following day. But for some reason they chose to camp a little further away, some way up the mountainside, which, if anyone who has any experience of mountaineering or indeed any kind of sort of camping in the wilderness knows you're far better off sort of on the edge of a wood and forest than you are in the middle of nowhere in the mountains at sort of minus 30 degrees. It was a very strange choice in the first place to actually camp up there. So that was the first thing that people noticed that wasn't what they planned to do. And again, there's no explanation, not even in their diaries, as to why they suddenly changed their mind.
One of my first, things is, why would you plan on going to a place called Dead Mountain? That just seems like a really bad start to your planning process. It's like, where are we going to end up? Dead Mountain.
It's just a name, or
no, it was really.
Also, I was reading that the one who turned back, he had heart trouble and a whole bunch of other stuff, and he just couldn't continue with the hike. And also, I heard that they got lost in my readings, and he didn't want to lose elevation, so they just went ahead and stayed on the peak that they were on. Is that correct?
Well, as I say, it's not entirely clear why they changed direction. I mean, certainly, possibly they did get a little bit lost, certainly because the snow in the last couple of days before the 1st of February, when the incident, whatever it was, occurred, the weather was far worse than it had been and was worse than expected. I mean, some of the photographs you've got that survived shows those last couple of days, there were quite heavy snow blizzards. So it was easy to have lost some of their way. But I mean, they were all experiencing what they were doing. It wasn't the first trip for any of them. They'd done this before. They had the compasses and maps. So there was no real reason why they should get completely lost. But you can tell if you've gone from being in the edge of a wood to halfway up a mountain. So why they suddenly changed that direction is really quite strange. It's not, as I say, there's nothing in their books to say why. Let me just come back to that whole dead mountain business, because often people do use that as quite a scary thing. It's called dead mountain.
I know.
Mountain of the Dead. It's the translation of Skull Dyatlov, which basically, the reason it's called that is because there's nothing up there. Nothing's living up there. There's no plants. There's no animals. It's just dead. It's like, why bother going there? I mean, the summit they were heading for was Autumn, which actually means don't go there. There's nothing up there. Not sinister. It's
That's different, though. That is different.
Language. They're quite literally what they call things. They're like, they'll just name it as it is. It's like, don't go there. It's boring. There's nothing there for you. I mean, obviously, more seriously, if you are a hunter-gatherer, then, there's nothing up there to hunt or gather. You are putting yourself in danger. But that's what it was meant. It wasn't anything dark or sinister, but which is often gets mistranslated as Mountain of the Dead, which isn't that at all. It is just Dead Mountain. But yeah.
It's just crazy. I just think on paper, where we're going to go. We're going to go to a place that says, do not go there. Don't go there. And Dead Mountain, there's nothing on there.
I see Dead Mountain, Dead River, that's okay. But it says, do not go there. Come on, guys. What are we doing?
If you think about it, it's kind of like you guys with Death Valley. It's not like it's dead in the sense you're going to be eaten by monsters, but it's like it's very, very, very hot. Don't go there. It's not a nice place to be. It's that kind of thing, So I'm glad you put on the picture. I don't know if other people can see the picture of the names. They're all long and complicated. This has been the one bugbear of this entire investigation.
Yep, that one.
Trying to get those names right. But yeah, often, as I say, they're just pronounced by their first names because it makes life a lot easier.
Yep, that's the leader.
Yeah. So you come on to that night, that night of February the 1st. We can go through the details now of what we think happened, but again, a lot of it is speculation based on what was left afterwards. It's to say, it seems odd that they decided to camp at a different site to where they'd planned to, but they did. From what we can tell from what was left of the tent, the stove was put up but then dismantled at some point. And then something happened during the night. Now, again, of course, this is the speculation. No one really knows what happened during that night, but the resultant effect of whatever it was led them to exit the tent, head down the side of the mountain towards where the forest was that they would have been camping in originally. And whatever happened next remains a complete mystery. But they reached at various points down towards the wood, based themselves there, and then some of them made a trek back towards the tent, although none of them actually made it from where they were found. But we have the mystery as to what on earth happened that night, why on earth they left. Again, there was nothing in their diaries that night describing any incident, anything that occurred that could explain why the sudden decision to excavate from their tent. It's often been pointed out that they didn't simply open the front of the tent and climb out and walk away or run away. They cut their way out of the tent. Now, that had suggested to some that they were in a major state of panic, that they couldn't even have time to open the tent and get out that way. They were so panicked and frightened they decided to cut their way out of the tent. Now, there's a slight misnomer going on here because it's not like a modern tent that we have to do with a simple zip that you open to get out of. These were individually quite tight buttons that were used, like you get on a duffel coat with the bar and the sort of hoop part. Now, to undo those takes a good 10 minutes even, because you're working in the dark, sort of inside, trying to get outside to undo them. So to get out a little bit quicker, for whatever reason, cutting your way out does make more sense. But it does seem that they then simply exited the tent and carried on a single line down the side of the mountain. Now, if you've cut your way out of a tent and you were frightened something's happening, you're just going to run like mad, get the hell out of there. But it seems they followed each other down like in a single trek.
Yeah, and that was one of the, obviously we're going to get into that too. That was one of the craziest parts is, here's this thing, there's signs that look like there was a panic, But then all of a sudden, as soon as they're out of the tent, they're calm, walking a line. And then as we later on when we get to it, when you start seeing the state of some of the corpses that are found, this does lead to the thing that there was either something trying to get them, that they encountered something, because some of the injuries that some of the sustained is not the normal that somebody would get just tripping and falling, running into something. And that's what it gets, where I think for me was one of the biggest parts that were compelling where this was so crazy is it doesn't fit any one theory. There's like so many different things that could work.
Absolutely. This is the problem of all the theories that are put forward, and there are many. None of them can take into account all the facts that we know. Obviously something could be speculation, but as you talk about the injuries there, the range and difference of injuries is quite strange. It's not like they all obviously crushed to death by the fall of snow or something else heavy landing upon them. Some of them had injuries that had no physical external appearance to them, but had internal injuries only, which again is quite strange. I remember reading recently about how sometimes people experiencing an explosion can actually have no physical injuries on the surface, no abrasion, no skin, nothing like that, but been damaged internally by the force of the explosion. And one or two of them showed those kind of signs of injuries, as if there'd been actually some kind of explosion nearby to cause the not obvious physical external injuries, but internal only, which again is very strange. So you have them at some point, let's say in the evening, carving their way out of the tent, making their way down the hill towards where there is the wood. And one thing we do know is that part of the journey, they actually went past a staging post, which did have basic supplies that have been placed in there that campers could use if necessary, just very basic rations and things like blankets, etc. I've often wondered if perhaps their intention was to try and find that secondary shelter, like the thing, we've escaped the tent, it's badly damaged, it's not going to be safe to go back to for whatever reason. Let's try and find that hideout where this stuff is being stored. Unfortunately, it appears they went slightly the wrong direction. Now, just a bit of a speculation on my own part is if you look at the topography, there's like a gentle rise either side of the wood. And if you go one side, you can follow a straight path down to where this storage place was. But if you're on the other side of it, you're going nowhere. You're going into the wood and you're going to get lost. And I've often wondered if perhaps their plan was possibly once they'd realized that there wasn't an immediate threat or danger, that perhaps they should try and find that staging post with the equipment that was available to them there, but didn't get to it. Because it appears they reached the edge of the wood, as your illustration is showing, and they stopped there for a while, built a small fire with probably the branches of the trees around them, because it was noticed by the investigators that some of the lower branches of the trees have been broken off, and it looks like they tried to make a fire with those. It was also noted that a couple of the guys actually had burns on their hands and feet, where they tried to warm themselves up to the point they literally put their hands in the fire. They were that cold. You're talking about minus 27 degrees Celsius with minus 19 Fahrenheit. You're not going to last long in weather like that because, importantly, one thing I must admit we forgot to mention was most of them weren't even fully clothed. They were partially dressed. A couple were literally in their underwear.
Like this picture, this is a modern one, but this is about the same 1st of February in 2019. But just to show you the conditions, like this is what there's a good chance that this is what they would have looked like.
Absolutely. You see the original photograph are available. The kind of clothing they were wearing was very sort of thick, very heavy, very well insulated, and they left it. They didn't even stop to put clothing on. It suggests they were getting ready for bed, which would probably place it around probably 9-10 p.m. at night, as a guess. No one really knows to say, but you're looking at probably that kind of time frame for getting ready for bed after sort of an evening meal and sort of chatting, as they often like to do, and sing songs, as their notebooks describe. So you look at that kind of time frame. So they didn't even stop to get clothing. So, whatever it was made them want to leave the tent rapidly. But once they're outside, it gives you an impression that it wasn't as immediate threat as they thought it was, or the nature of the threat had changed. And they made their way down the side because it wasn't seen as being like some kind of panic rush all the way down the mountains. The tracks that were found were still like relatively walking rather than running kind of headlong down the hill, as if if you're running down the hill in the dark, your chance that you're going to fall over. There was no real signs of that. So it's like they sort of trudged their way down to the tree line. and set up a small camp there. Now, something happened because 2 of the bodies had what looked like fight marks, as if they'd got into some kind of fight. And then 3 of the group, Igor himself, Rostam, and Zena, started to head back towards the tent, left the others behind. Now, we know 2 of them remained by the trees, the 2 with longer names, the 2 Yuris, while the other 3 ended up in a creek just a little way off. Now, the injuries to the 4 of them in the creek are probably some of the strangest of all in terms of how the bodies were found. I mean, one of the girls who remained in the water area was missing her tongue, as if somehow it had been removed. And it gets a bit graphic, guys, but the autopsy said that there was blood in her stomach. So she'd swallowed blood, so she was alive when it was removed. How it was removed, what removed it, is unknown. But I mean, things like it's been suggested where she was in the snow for a period of time because they weren't found for about 3 months after the initial incident. That perhaps microbes or small insects that perhaps eaten the tongue. But as I say, with blood in the stomach suggests no, she was alive when it was. However, it was removed. It was removed. I mean, there's little details like that when people say, "Oh no, it was an avalanche. It was that kind of thing." Yeah. What avalanches causes tongues to disappear from someone's mouth?
and eyeballs to be pulled out.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the eyeballs itself, it is questionable again because you're talking about soft tissue that could freeze and then be damaged by the frozen ice. So that's possible, but certainly not the tongue. The tongue remains a mystery as to how that would have gone missing. It really is one of those strange things.
Interesting part, like you said, but all 3 that have actual injuries, not hypothermia, are all in the creek.
Yes.
It's like they either fell and landed in the creek or they were placed there, but they didn't have hypothermia. Like I'm not going to say the names, but the chest trauma, the internal bleeding, and the fatal skull injury were the only 3 bodies in the river.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you have the question of 1, how did they get there? Yeah. 2, what caused those damage and injuries? I mean, what was suggested, they had the appearance of people who had been in a car crash.
Yeah,
in terms of how the bodies were damaged. One thing I would like to mention that again Keith McCluskey has drawn out is he's a little unsure about some of the material in the autopsies. He said because there's some confusion as to which bodies had which injuries. Now, the ones that were grouped around in the creek, they seem to be the same ones, but which one of those bodies had which injuries, there is a little confusion about in the actual autopsy report itself. It's not entirely clear. So he's always said to be a little bit cautious of taking that too seriously in terms of exactly what's being said in it, because it might not be correct. But certainly, as you say, predominantly the injuries that the others died for was basically hypothermia, was exposure to the extreme cold. I mean, that's a good example there in the photograph of the effect of extreme cold, frozen solid like that. They were literally solid as ice, and the bodies had gone into rigor and remained sort of locked to those kinds of shapes, which themselves are quite bizarre to say the least. But it's again, it is just trying to understand why they ended up in this state. Again, it remains a mystery. What was the reason for the argument? Why did some of them decide to head back to the tent and others decided not to? Probably the safest place ultimately would be either the tent or deeper into the woods. But wherever you're going to go, in minus 27 degrees Celsius, minus 19 Fahrenheit, you're not going to last more than a few hours. Even fully dressed in the appropriate clothing, out in that level of cold, you're taking a chance. But to be half dressed or undressed, you've got no real chance.
And here's an image of one there. The eyes are missing.
Absolutely.
You could say that was like an animal or some insects, but why that's the only body with eyes missing.
Again, I say these were actually in deep snow. That's why they couldn't find them at first. The snow would have been something like 20 foot deep around them at the time when the bodies were found out. It's because the thawing level dropped enough that you could actually find them. So it does also beg the question: how did they get so deep in the first place? Or if you turn and say questions about this incident, as I say, up until that night, it was more or less an ordinary camping trip. It was going as it's supposed to go, a ski trip. It was a few things go a little bit wrong, but then they do this. I mean, there was another group that also went to a different part of the Ural Mountains that they met up with just before they kind of went off into the wilds, and their trip was perfectly fine. They had no incidents, no problem, nothing. Indeed, they spotted something on the night, which we can get to a bit later on, that is interesting, and I won't say too much about it now. He puts a photograph up, which helped, but they too were aware of something in the sky that night. I won't say more than that for the time being, but he does suggest other things may have been going on. I've been talking for quite a while there, guys. You must have
Oh
questions.
that was the thing. That's kind of the part that's beauty of this is it lets you come and present it stuff, and then as we go, we just like to chime in and add little things here and there, because the theory about that, one that's pretty prevailing, I think, was the one that they said the tent was full of smoke and they needed to get out. They couldn't open, like you said, unlace the opening. So the quickest way is to cut itself out. But then I've also saw reports, I think Chris saw one too, where they didn't light the stove that night.
They didn't even light the stove. The stove was just kind of dismantled, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
So you would have think they would have set the stove up to stay warm, but that totally discredits that they set a fire inside their own tent. So I mean,
it's one of those things. There's been discussion over whether the stove had been used that night or not. But one thing's for certain, it was dismantled when it was found, which means it had to have been cold, which meant the fire would have to be out for some time before you could dismantle it. So certainly the idea of being filled with smoke makes no sense whatsoever.
I was also reading they had one of them had like high levels of radiation in their body even after they were found, and several months later.
This again is one of those interesting areas. It's a little unclear as to which. It could well have been two of them. It could well have been when the bodies were stored together that has caused the connection of the radioactive material. It's unknown. We do know that one of the guys was involved in an accident some time earlier at a nuclear facility, but we're talking about months ago, and the idea that it would remain on his body for that period of time is unlikely, although it's possible it was on an item of clothing that he'd worn that day and put on again for the trip. It was transferred that way, because it's I forget which form of radiation it was, but basically it wasn't very sticky, if you like. It would wash off fairly easy off of clothing, so it would have been something that would have been on clothing but would be easy to be removed. So again, there's a bit of a mystery whether it was to do with the incident that night or it was something to do with the clothing, but there was definitely records that there was radioactive levels on one clothing. But interestingly, one of the investigators noticed that one of the should we say military people involved in the investigation did have a Geiger counter with him. Again, no one thought to ask why, or if they did ask, no one said them in Russia in the 1950s. No one probably asked the question. But why would you bring a Geiger counter to a site like this in the middle of nowhere? What's the reason for bringing that? But yeah, apparently there was one. So it was seen by an investigator.
Yes, there's some that I read. There's two of them that worked in some fashion in one of them was a secret plutonium, producing facility.
Yeah, and there had been a minor accident a few months previously, and that's possibly they know. I must admit, guys, I forget which one it was, but there's certainly they were there at the time.
As we were doing that,
they were there.
Yeah, it was. In both of the, like I said, in those two, and the clothing, the only clothing that was radioactive was tied to those two. And so that I've seen one where they're like, well, okay, well that kind of explains the radiation, why this, why this, but then. Same thing. It's just there were, when you're looking at the bodies, the two that were fully clothed, that were outside of the tent. So there's not really, obviously there's no record of it. Why were those two out fully geared and everybody else was in the process of going to, so was it bathroom time? You got to get out there, so you're freezing, so you're going to go out in your gear, and then something happens, and those two guys are outside of the tent.
So it's one of those questions that I've often wondered about. What were the bathroom facilities in that tent? Because I can't imagine you step outside for a leak, would you? It could be pretty bloody cold. So they must have had a section that was closed off. As far as I know they did close off one section for the girls to have some privacy. So they may have had another section in the tent for bathroom facilities. But apparently they looked like they were wearing each other's clothing. And it's been suggested that two of the guys died fairly early on and they had the clothes taken off of them, and basically others put them on because they were freezing to death, clearly. But it is, again, the question of why stay there? Why stay on the edge of the wood? Why not go deeper in where it might be a little bit safer, a little bit warmer? I mean, at least you're out of the strength of the wind with blizzards that may have been blowing around at the time. Although the reports say it was only light winds that night, not, I think, too heavy blowing over. But still, just to be in deeper into the wood, you're into more densely area that's possibly safer than trying being just on the edge, and certainly going back up to the tent again. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that when you for well the tent's got huge bloody holes in the side of it? It's not going to be the most comfortable place to be, but yeah, they seem to want to go back to it.
Well, that was like I was going to bring that up to you. It's funny you said that. It's like you left the tent for some reason. So why? I mean, I get it. It's cold. You get out there. I mean, they left in a panic. Everybody, by all accounts, everything was in an orderly fashion, folded. The clothing was right there. There was nothing out of order. So obviously, when they left, I could see, okay, man, we're freezing. We got to get back and get the clothes. But at the same point, it's like, what caused them to leave in such a hurry that they didn't even get dressed?
Yeah, but you said they were in a rush. They cut a hole in the tent, but they walked orderly. So unless, like, why would you walk so carefully with each other? If you're in a panic, you're going to be scattered, So
yeah. I mean, the simple thing is to walk together so you don't lose each other in the dark. Yeah. But if you just cut your way out of a tent, you're in a panic state. You don't go from a fugue state to calm and rational in an instant. And again, you wonder, there was some kind of argument about whether to go back to the tent or not. So whatever the threat was, they weren't sure if it was gone or not. So, I mean, the idea that perhaps initially it was an avalanche, they heard that or felt the rumbling of avalanche, let's get out quick. And then there's no avalanche. Okay, so let's just carry on walking down the hill because, it takes time to walk down the side of the mountain. If there's an avalanche, it would have come down on them. So if there's no avalanche, or let's go back, it might still happen, but there's no sense that it was an avalanche in the first place. You try to think of a rational explanation, and yet there's always questions that don't quite fit. I mean, the idea that one of your people there saying they were trying to be quiet to prevent the avalanche. Yeah, the other problem is the slope of the mountainside itself. It was something like 34, 35 degrees. It's too shallow for a substantial avalanche. You'll get snow flurries falling, but according to the mountains, the avalanches in that area were very, very rare, and they weren't very big when they happened because it was quite a shallow fall. The idea of an avalanche that was sufficient to crush them or for them to panic enough to have to get the hell out of there because of it, it seems unlikely because it was fairly shallow. So again, it just doesn't, none of it adds up. When you try to find a good coherent theory, there's always holes that don't make sense.
And with that being quiet, too, that was one of the theories out there that they're being hunted by something. They're trying to be quiet because even one of they found a part of a knuckle inside the stomach. So they bit through a finger, and they think in like what Craig brought up there in the questions too is I wonder if that was one of the things. Like, did that happen? Did her tongue getting did something occur during the time, like they're trying to be quiet, like something's trying to hunt them? Because I know that was one of the theories, like the branches of the cedar tree all sheared off up to 15 feet, is that maybe that was something like they were trying to escape something at the same time.
I think there's a couple of points with the tree branches. I mean, it could well be that, as I said before, they were just trying to get firewood to build a fire. They could be trying to get off of the ground because maybe that was not safe to be on. But the thing is, there were knives in the tent. There were things that could work as weapons that would have just left in the tent. If they thought they were being hunted by something, surely you'd take at least that with you, a knife. But no, they were left behind. Yeah. I mean, we'd ask what animal would bite someone's tongue out. I mean, basically from the root, it would have to be a human being doing that kind of attack. But then there was 9 of them. Unless it was a very large group of people that no one had spotted, seen. I mean, one of the theories it was escaped prisoners from a prison that wasn't far away. But again, that makes no sense. Why would the prisoners? You just want to get the hell out of there and try and get to somewhere that's much more safe than sort of stay out the side of a mountain. And again, there's no evidence there was a prison break at that time anyway. So no other reports of escaped prisoners anywhere.
Because that one with the tongue, it's like the diaphragm was missing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, bitten off because you were cold. It was literally the tongue was missing.
Yeah.
I was reading another one that they think maybe the indigenous people that stayed around in that area captured them for trespassing on their land, and they said they supposedly interrogated some of them people, and nobody said they had any knowledge of it.
Mm-hmm. And the Mansi people themselves are harmless, and basically they don't have a problem with these people visiting the area. In fact, it would bring possibly some kind of trade with the sort of the city people in. They were the first people to help in the search. They were really concerned and wanted to help try and find these people. It's not in their nature, and there's absolutely no evidence of them ever doing that with the people who would regularly visit the area. As I say, this was almost a tourist spot. I mean, it sounds weird to say, I know, but these ski trip routes were well marked and were well known, and this was one of them. They say they left it for whatever reason. They didn't go to Torton as they planned to, but it was a relatively well-known route, and the Nazis knew the Soviets, if you like, would go through the area. So there was no reason for them to do that. But again, if they were being attacked or hunted, they were left weaponry and knives behind in the tent, and there's no sign of them. There's no sign of weaponry of any kind being used upon them. It was more of a, as I say, kind of crushing effect of something, or almost like an explosion effect for internal organ damage. I mean, obviously there were a lot of marks on the bodies that were definitely caused by frostbite, both pre and post mortem. Mm-hmm. But the other injuries, to say, they don't add up to anything that make coherent sense in terms of this is one thing that's caused these injuries. There were lots of different things causing injuries, and that's what makes it so strange.
Yeah, because, if it was an explosion, like, obviously we're talking about the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, they're going to be testing stuff. So, I mean, you could make what they saw in the sky, like you said, we'll get to that here in a bit, but, what they saw, that could have been Russian military doing testing, the explosion. But then, like you said, why would several of them exhibit these signs, but nobody else?
Yes, exactly.
And,
I mean, you would not go anywhere near military testing sites. You would know, I mean, you wouldn't tell you what they were exactly, but you know those areas, you just don't go near them. You'd be warned off for, before you left home, as it were, stay clear of those areas. I mean, one of the theories is that it was some kind of weapon that was being tested that went completely off course. Again, there's no evidence for it. There's no obvious crash site of any missile nearby that anyone spotted. I mean, remember, once the search parties are out there, it wasn't just the military were searching. Locals, the same Nazis, were helping out. Other people came up to help with the search. It was a massive search. And no one spotted anything like that in anything anywhere near the areas these people were in. So, I mean, again, there's theories about some kind of explosion in the sky that perhaps caused the panic. But a loud bang, you want to go out and what the bang was, but you wouldn't necessarily start trekking down the side of the mountain again to get away from it. So it is, again, you get lots of good theories that make sense until you start to fit all the known facts and you think, well, that doesn't work for this reason. It is galling in some respects. You think, it's a good theory, that explains that bit. Oh no, it doesn't explain that bit. It doesn't quite fit all of it. Nothing fits all of it.
Yeah, because why would a couple of them just be found? Okay, they froze to death. Okay, great. Well, then why do these ones look like they were attacked? I mean, fractured skulls.
Yeah.
Things are missing. I mean, the one, I think it's Ludmilla. I think she was the one that, if I remember from, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're when they looked at it, it looked as if her rib cage was being pushed out.
Yes. Again, that's what I was saying about the explosion thing. It looks almost like there'd been an explosion for that kind of damage. Again, or the idea of some kind of car crash. That was the closest comparison they could find for the injuries was a car crash, which is like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever. But as I say, as we're both saying here, it is those that were in the water nearby that stayed there for months. How did they get there in the first place? And secondly, what accounts for the injuries? It wasn't like it was a huge drop into the water, because it wasn't. It was in the snow, obviously, but it was a short fall into frozen water and snow. It wasn't. They weren't hitting concrete or something too solid. I mean, obviously ice is solid, but there was snow on top of it that would have braced any kind of fall down into it. You might get a bruise or two, but you're not when you're sliding maybe 10, 15 feet down into this.
Yeah, you're not going to look like you were in a car wreck.
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, one of the suggestions is that these people actually died somewhere else and were transported to the creek and left there. And it's an interesting theory, but there's nothing to back it up. There's no obvious sign they were from anywhere else. There's no obvious signs of tracks that were left behind in that area. I mean, the areas were checked, these woods were checked, and they weren't seen because they were under the snow. So they'd obviously snow had fallen on top of them since, because the search didn't begin for, let me just double check the dates. It was a few days later, because they were expected to be back in Vishny, where they set out from on February the 12th. So it was a full 12 days after they'd obviously died before a search party even began, or the idea of a search was begun. And there are strange questions around exactly when the search began, because according to official records, the search party first began on the 21st of February. But some recent documents came up a little while ago that put the date as the 16th of February, which is not what's in the official records, but it's a good few days earlier. So that in itself is strange. There is one document that surfaced that suggests possibly as early as the 6th of February, was when their searches began. Now, that wouldn't make any sense because they were expected back no earlier than the 12th. So you wouldn't begin a search party for people you weren't expecting to be lost until the 12th. So that one's a bit strange, but the 16th is a little odd. It seems to, the documents that's come to light mentions that date about 3 or 4 times. It's not like it's just one miswrite because it's handwritten. No, it's not like it's a miswrite. It's there several times saying they started on the 16th. Who exactly it was on the 16th, we don't know. But it was a search party that was there on the 16th. So that, it is problematic there. But so the idea that the bodies were moved, one of you guys was just saying there, it's possible, but there's no evidence for it. I mean, there's no sign of them dying in one place and being moved to another place. The bodies that were found, the 2 that were found by the fire, were just there, and the others decided to trek back. So how do they get separated to the point of dying and being moved? That wouldn't make any sense. As I say, they weren't found for a period of time because they were deeply buried in the snow, and so they'd obviously fallen on top. And it wasn't until it thawed, I think it was something like the middle of March or early March before they were actually found. It was the 4th of March. So it was quite a while afterwards that they were found.
So I don't know if anybody's thought about this theory, but if the footprints only went so far and they were found several months later, why would the snow would have covered up all the footprints? So why was there just a couple footprints left? I mean, that's a mystery to me. I'm wondering why, like, the snow would have completely demolished all the footprints.
Well, fortunately, there hadn't been a lot of snowfall between the incident itself and the first searches. That's where they were able to find them. Also, but the way snow works is it indents down. More snow falls on top of the indentation. You still have an indentation. It's like if you dig holes in the ground and put sand on top of it, the sand will sink down a bit because there's already indentations in the sand. And that's how they were able to trace some of the footprints as being, again, no time of them running at great speed. It was just like they'd water down the side. So, I mean, you've got some of the photographs there, which are taken a few days after, and of course, there's footprints everywhere where the searches had begun. But the initial searches, this is how they were able to track them down or trek them down that side of the mountain.
Yeah, this, you have this. I moved down here to Florida from Oregon, and we would have some of the things where we were negative, 10 to 20. You get some of those things, and those things, it doesn't really snow. It's ice crystals that come out, and it hurts to breathe. I mean, you'll see it just, there's not a lot of, it would be more like ice crystals forming, like you said, going into the indentations than that. But it was one kind of touch back real quick before we move on about where that they were placed there and like the positioning of the people, because there's a theory too that some of the people were taking clothing from ones that they came across as they progressed in this motion to their ultimate demise. But it also leaves the thing, if this is a nice orderly thing, why didn't they get dressed?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't make sense. It's almost as if they panicked to get out of the tent. As soon as they're out of the tent, it's like, oh, it's not an immediate threat, but we better get out of the way just in case anyway. I mean, that photograph you're showing right now is an important one because I think it dispels the idea of a substantial avalanche. They're skis that are sticking up. They're part of the tent is still standing. Okay, there's snowfall onto the tent, but the skis are still sticking out the ground. And they are their skis. Why? Yeah. A substantial avalanche. They've been crushed, but yet they're still standing.
It says July 11th of this year. It took from 1959 for them to finally say avalanche. That's what happened. Yeah. That's it. But like you said, the skis are still there. Yeah. So you just said avalanche. Write it, close it. It's good. Don't worry about it. It's like, but it's not an avalanche.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that was problem with this new investigation that was carried out was that they automatically decided to eliminate a lot of the possible things that could have caused it and focus on just natural causes, avalanche, slab snow, I think they called it. It's this like idea of a big block falling down on top. That kind of thing was like they limited the investigation before they've even begun it and decided, no, this is the area we're going to examine. Anything outside that, we're not interested in. It was like, what is even the point? What is the point? It's like it's a pantomime investigation, and we're going to look at certain things. I think that guy was killed with that knife. The fact there's a smoking gun over there, I'll ignore that. No, I'm convinced it was a knife. It's that kind of thing. It's just ridiculous. It is strange. I mean, the photograph you're seeing again is about a week into the investigation. So some of the snow had fallen on top. It may have been falling snow. It may have been pushed over as they were digging through the tent. I don't know why there's snow on top of it, like Craig is saying there, but certainly that shows to me convincing proof it wasn't an avalanche, because it would have been obliterated. If an avalanche was that severe that caused them to panic and cut them out of the tent, everything would have been crushed.
You know, it wasn't right up there. If I don't know if you saw the question there, it's just that, you know, if you look at the top of the tent, what is your thoughts on? He thinks it appears that it's snow was placed on top of that tent.
It does
in the cover up.
I don't know. To be honest with you, I've puzzled over that myself. I don't think it's snowfall, because you can still see footprints not far from it. Now, I'm not saying that's the original footprints, but the idea if it was snow very recently, it would have covered it, because obviously they would have been inside the tent and checked it out. I don't know. I honestly don't know why there's snow is sitting on top of it like that. Possibly it was just kicked up as they were digging around the area of the tent.
So this sole survivor, he's obviously been interviewed after all this, right?
Yes. Well, he left the group, as I say, the last sort of stopping point in sort of humanity.
He died. But it's just like I'm wondering if I understand he had health problems that probably took him out, but I'd be interested to see if he felt any tension in the group. He was with him for 3 days, so did he notice something wrong?
Well, no. There was a kind of almost like silly tension, because one of the guys had dated one of the girls before, and now that girl was with Dyatlov, the group leader. But there was no animosity. I mean, he said that we all got on fine. It was good fun. They said that, going back to the much older guy that we mentioned before, was 38 as opposed to the early 20s. They were a bit suspicious about him. He joined them relatively late, but it turned out it was a right laugh. He was a big joker, and they really liked him. He thought it was funny, and he was not a friend as such, because most of the other guys knew each other to some degree. He was a bit more of an outsider from that, but he said he fit in straight away and was a bit of a joker. So the one that people sometimes say maybe he was a KGB plant, or he was responsible, he murdered them or something like that. No, it didn't happen. But no, I mean, even their own diary show there was kind of banter and kind of fun. It was never serious dislike of each other. They got on reasonably well. As I say, even though that one was an ex of another one, but yeah, they got on fire.
There's no one to back that story up, but I heard that they got into it with a guy on the train regarding like a bottle of liquor or something. Do you think maybe he had something to do with the killing or whatever?
There was no evidence or sign that anybody else other than the 9 was in the area with them. There was a couple of incidents where they were a bit they as a group were a bit raucous on the train, and that caused a guard to tell them to basically keep quiet. And then the KGB, the police said, stop singing these rousing songs you're singing because it's annoying people. It's a bit ridiculous. They couldn't even do that. But yeah, I mean, there were fun time guys who were out to enjoy themselves. It was a holiday, when you think about how pretty awful life the Soviet Union was in the 1950s. This was a holiday. It was fun for them. So maybe they had a drink or two too many. But again, not out when they were in the wilds. They didn't drink because it was dangerous, obviously. I mean, there's been suggestions about perhaps the food had problems with it. Again, there's no evidence that there was anything wrong with the food. There was no sign of being sick beforehand. Those ideas, again, they can explain some of what happened, but not all of it. If they were all taken hallucinogenic drugs or something and were tripping out, going mad, and they got out of the tent. I mean, you get outside the minus 27 degrees. I don't care what you've been taking, you're going to feel that cold. No matter what you're on, you're really going to be affected by things available in the 1950s. I mean, modern stuff. This is a weird thing, but
absolutely.
Running around, they would be much more kind of organic. There wouldn't be like synthetic manufacture like you get stuff now. So you'd know it. You'd feel that cold.
So here's we showed this picture earlier. So these are some of the photographs that the group took as they went through there, and then we get to this one. This is the very last photograph that was taken.
It is the mystery shot. There is a lot of explanations for this. The one that I find the most compelling is actually one of the early reports of the photographs, is that this was actually in the lab after the incident when they tried to open the camera to develop the photographs. That's actually all it is. It's one of those shots you get at the end of a roll that hasn't worked properly, and they open the camera and it's still in place. And it gets exposed.
That makes sense, because that was the thing I was gonna ask you, is because everybody says like this is the picture of the orb that they saw, that was seen in the sky. I'm like, to me, this looks like a figure. I see a head, shoulders, like an arm and an arm.
Yeah. Also, if you go back up a little bit, the bottom that's almost like a square, go across from where you are, a bit there, an eye, go across the other side, go to the other side, another eye, possibly a mouth underneath.
Oh, yeah, right here. Yeah. Mouth,
That's
nose.
Pure pareidolia. People say there's a face in that. It's pure pareidolia where you see faces in random patterns and shapes. As I say, it was in one of the very early reports, official reports of the photographs before any kind of conspiracy theory started emerging, that this was actually in the laboratory afterwards, once the camera was found, that this was actually done. Others have said, no, this is actually a photograph taken on the night and it's completely blurred out, but there's an object falling from the sky and that's what they've captured.
That's what falling.
I mean, to me, it looks like a very, very out of focus, blurred image of something close up. But people have said they insist that that's what it is. Personally, I think that one's a bit of a red herring, that picture. People have read so much into it, but I do think it.
And that was kind of where I showed, like, here's these pictures that they're taking. So you mean to tell? Let's see if I had them all in order, that would be amazing. There. But here's somebody who knows how to take photographs. This has these cameras, and then all of a sudden they get that's why I was a little skeptical with the blurry one. It's like, why all of a sudden would there just be this completely out of focus? They don't know how to do it, and they were saying the crack on the lens.
It's actually on the negative. It's a scratch on the negative itself. It's the resolution has made it look like it's a crack, but it's actually a scratch on the negative, apparently.
So, maybe overthinking this, but it was just a little side note saying the 12-year-old Yuri something, the head of the foundation, said that he attended 5 of the hikers' funerals and they had a deep brown tan on their skin.
Yes.
That when I think of deep brown tan, I'm thinking like a sunburn or like some kind of like that. So how would they have a deep brown tan in winter?
Possibly it's the reverse. It's the freezer burn effect. Due to the extreme cold. Again, that's a speculation on my part. Again, partly what I've read and partly my own kind of deduction. But yeah, there has been a lot made of that. It's confusing because the autopsies are a little confusing. That may or may not have been the case, but certainly it's quite possible that the ice exposure caused that effect.
I still think it's funny how they just said, "Oh, it's an avalanche." I don't think it was. You're just trying to cover it up.
We were talking, Cold War Soviets. They weren't exactly forthcoming with details.
Oh, I know. But still, it took them to this year, July of this year, to be like, "It was an avalanche. Stop worrying about it." No, now you're covering something up.
Now, before we go too much further, we are going to, I don't want to get too hammered by everybody. Okay, Yeti. We got to touch on the Yeti.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. If we don't talk about the Russian Yeti, we're going to get hammered for like, what about that one? I'm like, okay, we'll talk. So what are your thoughts on here is the mysterious Yeti that attacked him?
Well, a lot of it is based on, have you got the one photograph that Posey shows of the Yeti?
Let me look. I don't have that one handy. Let me find it. I'll get it.
Okay, well, there is one picture that looks like some kind of Yeti-type creature in the background in a very blurred photograph. It's blurred because if you look at the size, the camera has focused on the trees either side of the image. That's the one that people often talk about as being the sign of the Yeti. But interestingly, in the film reel, the photograph just before is one of the guys in the full clothing of the frieze, and there you go. That's the picture. Now, what you can see is on the left as you look at it, the trees in focus. So the figure in the background is very, very blurred. But in the reel, the photograph just before, you've got one of the guys in obviously the snow gear, and if you look at what he's wearing, it's almost identical to what you see in that picture. He's got a hood on, the hood's raised up above his head, so his head looks elongated. It's light grey jacket he's wearing with darker trousers, and it's in literally the next frame, which was taken obviously just before that one. And they joked about they now know there's a Yeti out there, and it could well be he was mucking about pretending to be the Yeti in the snow. And the photograph looks a bit like, let's say, if you look at the photograph just before, you measure the proportions, it's definitely him. But because it's in the background, it would love a Yeti story. They've latched onto that one. I mean, there was a program on American TV a few years back, which I saw, which made a huge deal about being, he's proved it was a Yeti. No, it wasn't a Yeti. Absolutely not. I mean, there are, in the Mansi legends, there's definitely Yeti-type creatures talked about, but even the Mansi themselves said they've not seen it for years. So it doesn't really fit in. But as I say, the real, if you can find it, the real photographs, the one before it, you will see that
I'm trying to find. You remember, I mean, I could find different photos. I'm not sure. I don't have one that shows them like in chronological order.
It is unfortunate they are kind of scattered around, but you can.
It's like you have, just the different ones where they're just wearing in different states of. Yeah, I'd have to look. I'd have to look in that one. I'm not sure. Yeah, because the Mansi tribes, they talk about it in. I'm a believer in them. I'm more of the one. I believe that we're kind of multi-dimensional, where some of these creatures, they're in another plane, another existence, where they're a common, like they're bearers for us. But occasionally, the veil is able to be pierced, and sometimes these creatures make an appearance. And that's why we don't see evidence, like bodies, is because they're here and then they're gone.
I am actually with you on that. I am much more of a believer in the idea of ultra-terrestrials, that they are things that are existing here parallel with us that kind of phase in and out rather than nuts about spaceships from other planets. So I'm with you on that thinking, certainly. But in this instance, it kind of brings us on to what I think is the most intriguing theory that I've come across. To me, there's some weight to it, that there was some kind of strange skylight anomaly at the time, at that night, that I think was sufficiently bright in the sky for them to think, what the hell's that? And maybe something's coming towards them, a missile or something, but something that actually scared them. Now, interestingly, again, doing a bit of digging and Research, and Keith McCluskey put me onto this idea, was in the early 2000s, in an area not far from Dyatlov Pass, there were two incidents that occurred that were really quite interesting. The first one was at a borite mine, a few miles away, where there was a security guy who was there during the night, or every night he was there patrolling, because obviously this stuff was worse stuff and people were breaking into the mine and stealing borite. He had an incident that occurred that was very, very strange. He saw, well, first of all, he heard noises in the woods nearby. He went out to investigate and saw 4 very, very bright lights. And he described it as being so intensely bright that the shadows being cast by the trees were razor sharp because of the brightness of the lights. He said there were 4 of them, and he felt very uncomfortable by these lights. He said they were just lights, but there was something about them that made him feel very, very uncomfortable, to the point that he actually hid as they began to move towards him. And then they split again into individual lights. There was 8 of them. And then he said there was a rushing wind and an electrical spark sound. And they disappeared. So he's been doing this job for years, never saw anything like it. And it absolutely freaked the life out of him. He did some investigating, and he came across a report in a local newspaper of a huntsman who, again, was like a woodsman. He lived out in the woods. He was armed. He was out basically hunting in the middle of the night, had the same experience. And the guy said the same thing. He frightened the life out of him. He said, I just couldn't explain. These lights scared me. They were just lights. But there was something about them that absolutely unnerved him. And he was armed, and he still hid. And described the same thing. The lights moving through the wood, then a loud crack and a wind, and they were gone. Very strange.
Did the indigenous people say they saw the same thing, or were they just kind of being quiet?
No, they've talked about lights in the sky, and lights in the woods at night, anomalous lights. So they have stories of such things. So, there's a history to those as well from their reports. But they say these are normal guys. They were, people took the mickey out of them because they thought, you're not going to be frightened by lights, but they were. And both of them said they felt ill for weeks afterwards, felt uneasy and ill. So my theorizing has been that these lights occurred over the Dyatlov Pass area. They saw them through the canvas of the tent, but they also had that feeling of queasiness and uncertainty and thought, we need to get out of here. Cut through, and the lights disappeared, but were concerned enough to keep away because they had no idea what they were, to get away from them. And so they went down the side of the hill and waited and wondered, would they come back? Hence, climb the trees, look. They had a disagreement whether they should go back to the tent or not, because they didn't think the lights were going to come back. And that's what happened. That's my own theorizing. But there were reports from the other group that were actually ski tourists who said they saw lights in the sky over the area, which would have been that particular area. And they didn't recognize there as being anything like aircraft or missiles. There were just lights in the sky. And Mansi's reported lights in the sky that same night as well. So something was definitely up there. I mean, some would say that blurred photograph we showed before was the evidence of the lights. I would rule that out, but certainly these reports of the enormous lights in the sky are worth investigating. I don't think that we nuts about UFOs flying. I don't believe that, because I do think there were like these anomalous Earth lights that were causing not only the light to be seen, but were causing a physical, emotional, psychological effect upon, say, these two guys in the early 2000s. Both experienced it. You talk about a very remote area, so I mean, they could be going on for years and not being spotted. You just happen to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, effectively, and have had that experience. It doesn't explain all the events, obviously, but I do think there's a possible explanation for the reasons why they left the tent in the first place. That kind of, for me, works a little bit. So.
Yeah, that's what one of the things said too. Like, it could be an infrared sound, like you're talking about, and they got out of the infrared path, and the three just happened to fall down and hit the rocks. I don't know. I may be overthinking it, but it said it could be inducing panic attack in humans. Maybe it messed with them mentally, and they started attacking. One person started attacking, and another person tried saving him, because it's weird. I keep going back to, like you said, that the older 38-year-old that just randomly came up, and he's one of them that got hurt, and the 20-year-old female, and then a 23-year-old male. I don't know. There's something suspicious about that 38-year-old. He just randomly shows up, and he's hurt, and then two other people are hurt. It's like he did something, maybe to hurt the female, intentionally, maybe not. Another guy tried helping. I don't know. I keep going back to that guy. He's very suspicious.
I mean, it's possible, but as I say, according to their diaries, and there was at least 4 diaries kept by different members of the group, there was no kind of animosity within the group at all. They were getting on fine. I mean, it's possible something happened overnight that changed all of that, but certainly as far as I understand, he was just trying to get the same accreditation that they were after, so that's why he joined their group. And as they, it has been suggested he's got KGB connections, but again, there's no evidence for it whatsoever. There's no evidence of moving being anything other than just slightly older than the rest of them. But the effect of something strange occurring when you're out in the middle of nowhere and in something you've never experienced before, even though you're an experienced hiker, that can cause you to really start to panic and think, well, what are we supposed to do now? Is this thing going to come back? Are we in danger? Should we go back to the tent? Should we stay down there? I can see the argument developing as to what you should do next, whether you should go or stay, because you know you're freezing to death. You're not going to survive. You've got to do something. So you're going to end up possibly falling out of what to do next. You're going to get a bit kind of frantic and hysterical about what you're going to do next. But whether they end up really attacking each other, I don't know. I mean, it's possible, certainly. So there was a sign of definitely a fight occurred between Dyatlov himself and one of the other guys who died by the fire, by the trees. So there was obviously some kind of disagreement there that was quite enough to throw punches. But say 3 of them started to head back towards the tent. None of them made it because they got overcome by hypothermia eventually. But there was a definite disagreement within the group as to what to do next.
We go back to the same thing. They panicked out of the tent, but as soon as they got out of the tent, they're just calmly walking. So if there was something that scared you, or like the sound you're hearing, you should be panicking, running, not. I mean, again, like you said, it's at night, but still, you think you'd be more panicked than just carefully walking. I don't know.
Again, the only thing I can think is if it was causing a kind of a weird psychological effect, as soon as the light went, the effect went, and you got snapped back into normality. Almost like you come out to a hypnotic trance almost. I don't know. I really don't know. It is, I mean, as a side slightly, I mean, I used to be a hypnotherapist as well as a psychotherapist, so I know that you can go from a trance state to a quote normal state quite quickly and feel quite different as soon as you come out of it. But I'm not saying they were hypnotized, but I know the mind state can change quite quickly, quite substantially, very fast. And you think, oh, what's wrong now? Well, what am I doing here? Why have we cut away out of this tent for? What was the panic? 5 seconds, literally a minute ago. And you can switch from one to the other quite quickly. So, I mean, you look at possibly a degree of group hysteria happening here. One of them starts to panic, another one panics because the first one's panicking, and it spreads through the group quite quickly. And think, oh, we've got to get out of here. But interestingly, they cut their way out of the tent and then left the knives. They didn't take it with them. They left them behind. They were in the tent. They weren't found with them. It's like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, there's just some stuff that it's just weird.
What else was interesting, too, is Davina, the one that had the internal bleeding with the chest trauma, she was found wearing, I'm going to call them Kristoff's, burned, torn trousers, and her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. This is before this happened. So what happened to have? Why did he have burned pants, and what happened to her left foot and shin?
Well, the burnt hands, they believe, were they literally putting the hands in the fire because they were so cold. I mean, you lose your extremities, any sense of feeling your extremities pretty fast, and you're trying to get them back. Again, you're not thinking completely staying straightforward, putting your hands in the fire to try and warm them up. They obviously died fairly fast, and then the clothing was removed from them, and the others used it to keep themselves warmer. I mean, again, it makes kind of sense if you think it's life or death, and he's already dead alive, his bloody clothes, because I want to try and survive. But yeah. If you think that gives you an idea of the intensity of the cold, that they were actually putting their hands and feet in the fire to try and warm them up, and instead they actually burnt themselves.
Maybe it's me being born and raised in Florida, and I like doing adventurous stuff, like maybe going in the ocean and stuff like that. But I don't feel like climbing a mountain in what you say negative 20 degrees sounds like fun, and obviously it was not fun because what happened?
Well, if you think of the alternatives, what else can you do in the Soviet Union in the 1950s? There was nothing. It really wasn't any holidays anywhere else. And again, it's accreditation. They're all loyal communists, all members of the party. They all, the idea was perhaps they were trying to escape, and they were brought back because they were trying to escape to the West. Again, no evidence whatsoever. If you get this accreditation, you're rising up the ranks of the party. You are getting somewhere. You need to be somewhere in the party to become anything in the Soviet Union in those days. So you do these things because, again, as I said at the start, you're escaping for a while. You're being watched all the time. The KGB was huge. The police were controlled everything. The government was controlled. Every element of your life was controlled by the government. So these are often the only way to get away for a while from that kind of dictatorial authority was to go off into the mountains, escape. Okay, it was bloody freezing, but it was at least you were out of the sort of the prying eyes of the government for a while.
Free.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, sir, I said this is what I was hoping for. Like I said, I really appreciate your time. I mean, I looked in the thing; it's 1:00 your time. I mean, man,
that's fine. That's not me.
But yeah, we definitely, like I said, we're gonna keep in touch, and like I said, like to have you on at some other point. When we bring up another topic here too.
Sure.
So definitely, thank you so much. Wish you the best in your day tomorrow, or I should say day today for you. Thanks again for coming on the show. Really
enjoyed it. I have a habit of talking very fast when I really get into something, so I apologize if I've gone rather quickly. But we loved it. I mean, that was the thing, coming in, getting guests like you. We can just let you go, and then as we think of stuff, we're like, "Ooh, what about this?" And then it works great for us.
When you keep going, I had a question, and you answered it. I'm like, all right.
Fair enough.
All right, sir. Well, have a great night, and we'll see you later.
Thanks so much. You too, guys. Really enjoyed it. It's great fun.
Thank you very much.
That was cool.
All right.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. And this has been brought to you by Broadsbeard Care. Let's get it right here. All that's used stuff, broadsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B. You're going to save 20% off. Get that signature blend of ours. You're going to support us and him at the same time. Nanny Cakes, Nancy Burt, Central Florida area. Go to Nanny Cakes 407 on Facebook or 407-923-2898. Central Florida area. She's going to mention us. You're going to save 15% off your cake needs. Great cakes. 3beardspodcast.com. Check us out on the socials. Go to patreon.com/3beardspodcast. Support us. And just everybody, thank you for watching. Andy, Mercer, thank you again for taking time out of your evening coming on with us. We appreciate it. Everybody, have a great night, and we will see you later on.